Hello, and welcome to another review video. This time around, I'll be looking at the brand new in-house Butlers, Maids, and Pad Cafe. This machine costs 10 magic stones per roll and introduces 24 new REM units. This REM introduces two very strong teams, Ideal and Kurotobi's. Ideal is a full rainbow leader, and she is fairly accessible since you can exchange for that unit. Kurotobi is a little bit harder to get since he is a BGM, and the most common subs for their teams can be obtained from this REM. So if you plan to roll a lot, you have a fairly good chance of at least getting a full Ideal team, as Kurotobi being a BGM means that you might not be able to even roll one copy. Still, outside of those two leaders, there are others like Albrecht and Sena who are able to clear some specific content. This REM comes along with a brand new awakening, Afternoon Tea. This awakening gives your unit a 25% stat boost, and it reduces damage from poison matches and from moving thorns. Each awakening reduces damage from those by 20%. So if you manage to include 5 of these Afternoon Tea awakenings in your team, then you'll be completely immune to those two mechanics, which will certainly help in dungeons where you can't easily get rid of poison or have enemies that spawn a lot of thorns. It'll definitely be useful in the newer super altitude dungeons. Overall, I'm not that impressed with this awakening, and the novelty of it doesn't really make me want to roll in this very pricey REM, especially after the last few machines that have left me with not that many stones. I feel like if you have a Rosetta team, there's really not much reason to roll in this machine. Sure, there are units like Maid Persephone who does work with Rosetta, but that unit can only be obtained from the REM. Though I am sure that there is a significant number of people hyped for this event and either want to assemble a Kurotobi or Ideal team. So now, let me go through each unit from the REM, and if you like the video, please remember to like and subscribe. But before going into the REM units, let me look at some of the other Exchangeable and Descended drops. Butler Zeus and Maid Hera are a farmable unit that you can get from their Descended dungeon. They can definitely deal damage in a light PvP team and also have an interesting Evo active skill that can be pretty handy for specific farming setups. The first stage is a single target 30% gravity. This is obviously not ideal for dungeons with multiple enemies in each floor, but surely they can work somewhere. The second stage active skill gives you a pretty large cap break for GAT types for one turn, which obviously will also help sweep some floors. I would recommend getting at least one copy of this unit and max scaling them, as they might be useful somewhere. I actually haven't seen that many applications for this unit, but surely they'll be useful sometime in the future. I might even max skill 2 of these, since 30% gravities can bring enemies down to 50% HP, which is a very common super resolve value. Their equip can also be useful for farming setups, but it also has the same issue of only being a targeted, not true gravity. In a normal board, this does give you a light and dark brick, and these orbs could be useful for swiping teams. This Mylk variant is a unit that you can obtain by completing some of the Pad Cafe quests. She honestly doesn't seem that useful, especially with those OE and finger awakenings. But this is a free unit, so just make sure to get it, as maybe at some point that weird active skill might be useful for something. This Nell variant can be exchanged for by using these farmable maids. Just like with the free Mylk, this Nell also doesn't seem all that special. Their final stage active skill doesn't even unlock orbs, so I really doubt that you'll make much use out of this. This unit is not limited to one exchange, so you could get as many as you want as long as you're willing to farm some of these Pad Cafe dungeons. I would at most just get one if you care about collecting, since again, she is pretty lackluster. This event also has a few story dungeons, so make sure to check that tab and get those couple of stones from clearing those trivial dungeons. Apart from the stones, if you clear all of them, you will also get this equip, which again is also not that special, but this is a free Afternoon Tea equip. The MP unit for this collab is another Kalu and Mylk variant. The base can deal decent damage in a dark PvP team, but none of the dark PvP maid teams really stuck around in JP, so I wouldn't have high hopes for units of this archetype in Pad Cafe. You could make a system with two Mylks that gives you a looping 1.5 max HP buff, a 1.5 move time buff, and void attribute absorption. You'll also get a full board change, though the resulting board might not have enough orbs to match a PvP. You'll most likely have some other unit to help with orb generation if you decide to run her as a leader. Her equip is definitely more interesting than the base, so you might want to exchange for this alone. Even then, since I'm not really wowed by this new awakening, this equip doesn't look all that exciting. If you're lacking MP, I might even decide to skip this. But getting this is pretty much a requirement for any of you that are going for the ideal or Kurotobi teams, since those teams usually use the enhanced badge. As always, be mindful about your MP usage, as each REM will now come with an MP unit, and getting that resource can be either very time consuming or will require you to sell a lot of REM units. These are all of the other MP units that will arrive to our server in the near future. So again, careful with your MP usage, as you might want to get these other units. In the worst case scenario, you could always purchase these units for $30, though I still think that price tag is still pretty insane. Okay, now onto the REM units. A lot of these feel extremely weak. One thing that you'll notice is that most of them are bindable. So if you expect to encounter bindable debuffs, then you'll have to solve that issue either by having a leader skill that grants that awakening, such as Maid Haiku's leader skill, or by equipping the unit with an equip that has an unbindable awakening. To incentivize rolling more into this expensive collab, Gonho has made these bindable units have an equip that solves that issue. But I digress. Let me now look into these REM units. Natsuru and Hermei are both a bit useless, as they don't have skills with particularly useful effects. Hermei could obviously work on dark PvP teams, but as we'll see, these have a few issues, and never really stuck around in JP. Hermei's equip and a lot of the other units in this REM have the new Afternoon Tea Awakening, and while these have some novelty, a lot of these don't really look all that great. So for most of these, I am very skeptical about their uses. Haku can be system with 4 copies of herself to provide an expanded board, provide a damage cap break for herself and adjacent allies, but the resulting board doesn't exactly guarantee any TPA matches. It is very unlikely that you won't have a dark TPA, but nowadays, we all come to expect orb changers that are a lot more consistent than this. Haku is bindable, but if you run one of her as a leader, you can fix that issue. One problem with the leader skill is that she doesn't provide any follow-up attack, which will cause issues in newer dungeons. Ryumei packs a lot of Ls, but these are all overkill, and even though Gonho will be pushing out L teams soon in NA, these so far are mainly water focused and really won't be using this Butler. His second stage active skill can handle 3 absorption shield voids, albeit only for 1 turn, and this is only useful against enemies that you can reliably one-shot. L awakenings on equips are largely useless, at least for the time being in NA, and overall, I'm very skeptical about people having any uses for these units. Tsukuyomi is an exchangeable 8-star unit, meaning that you can use Path Cafe units as fodder, though I don't think that this would be a good use of that fodder, since the unit and equip are very unremarkable. The base is a damage dealer and auto healer that can deal with awoken binds every 4 turns. Usually the auto heal effect is very useful for swipe teams, and at the moment, Dark doesn't exactly have any swipe teams that sorely need Tsukuyomi. Maybe you could have some use for Tsukuyomi's equip due to the long-lasting roulette and time buff, but you might have other options if you've been playing for a while now. Still, I don't really see myself prioritizing Tsukuyomi for exchange. Suo's second stage active skill gives you a looping shield that also provides a damage spike for dragons as an added bonus. But the fact that this Evo active skill only reduces by 35% is not all that impressive nowadays. For a transforming unit, or one with an Evo active skill, I would expect the damage reduction to be at least 40% in this day and age. This is not all that commonplace right now, but that is where the game is trending, so Suo won't be aging all that well. That being said, he's not the worst option as a looping shield, especially if your team matches his colors, as he can deal a good amount of damage and can also help recover assists. The 25 billion cap break from his active skill for 1 turn is a nice added bonus to his active skill and could make a significant difference against some spawns. Suo's Afternoon Tea equip looks okay at best. It is decent due to its effective skill boost and long-lasting pierce and multi-turn bonus combo effects, though the fire sub-attribute doesn't make it all that appealing for most meta teams at the moment. And even though this unit is a little more useful than Tsukuyomi, Suo is unfortunately REM only, and again, since he's not that impressive, he's not worth the chase. These 2 units are rainbow board changers that are able to tackle some other mechanics. Adderley gives a small looping HP and move time buff on a 3-turn cooldown. Sagiri can handle combo absorption shields and is able to destroy an enemy shield on a 2-turn cooldown. Both units have very solid awakenings and active skills, but these pale in comparison to the new Rainbow meta units introduced in this REM and in the upcoming Bartender's rerun. Those units themselves also give you a Rainbow board and necessary cap breaks, so because you'll be systeming those other units, you would only bring these units for their secondary effects, and I think that that alone does not buy Adderley or Saggedy a team slot. So if you're going to be playing modern Rainbow teams with units like Maid Ideal and Bartender Alexander, it's hard to justify using these Pat Cafe units. Graphene is another strong Rainbow unit that also didn't see much use in JP. She will grant a looping move time buff along with a roulette and a cap rate to 12 billion for devil types. The cooldown is fairly short, so with her, it'll be easy to counteract cap break and targeted attack debuffs very quickly. 12 billion is also fairly high for a looping cap breaker, at least for now. You could even put Graphene in a non-Rainbow Devil team, though if you do that, you'll be wasting Graphene's really high damage multiplier. She can serve as a decently strong leader, though her teams are restricted to Devil types and require you to match all attributes plus heal to activate her damage reduction. The Devil type requirement is easy to meet nowadays via equips, but all of these together might turn off a lot of people, especially with Maid Ideal in the fray now. Ideal has the same playstyle, is a stronger leader, and is arguably more flexible with her light attribute requirement. Nephthys is a looping shield unit that also gives you a skill charge. This means that you don't have to carry other haste units in your team to loop her shield, but if need be, she can enable those haste teams. The only meta haste team at the moment is the Karasuno team, and to some extent, this unit can work as a Daichi replacement, though Nephthys won't be dealing much damage in that team. In addition, she can replace the L's or Hilo E's that Daichi has, so you'll have to tinker a lot with the rest of your Karasuno team to make up for those issues. Obviously, this unit is better suited and meant to work better with Mei Nell, since again, her looping shield innately loops. Nephthys Equip is great for these bindable BDP units in the Pat Cafe REM, and this could also work on Rosetta if you're going for a BDP build, since it has that Dark Sub-attribute awakening. Both of these Dark BDP orb generators are a bit underwhelming, as they'll require you to run multiple to guarantee at least 9 orbs on the board. Lucifer drops you to 1 HP, but if you stack enough afternoon teas and units with heal OEs that also generate heals, like Kamimasubi, in your team, you probably won't have much difficulty healing in endgame dungeons that have a lot of thorns or lower your recovery. Lucifer does show up in some Maid Nell teams, so keep an eye out for him if you'll be chasing that leader. Kami's first stage active skill gives a long-lasting auto-heal effect, but this can be voided by enemies like the ones in floor 7 of GA1, so make sure to check ahead of time if the dungeon you are tackling has this sort of debuff. Kami can work in a Maid Nell team to help supplement the orb generation, but since her cooldown is on 2 turns, she is not all that reliable. Maid Nell herself gives you some orbs on a 2-turn cooldown, so you'll be cycling 2 of her. She is also your cap breaker, and to get enough dark orbs on the board every single turn, you would probably go with Lucifer over Kamimasubi since he has a 1-turn cooldown. Unfortunately, getting Lucy is a little bit more difficult than getting Kamimasubi since he is REM only. Kami can be exchanged for with some event units and GFEs, but since she barely sees any use, I wouldn't really rush to that, even after taking into account the fact that there are only a handful of 10C and Hilo E equips out there. Kami's equip alone wouldn't make me pull the exchange trigger. And speaking of GFE exchanges, in 2 months or so, we'll see Solomon, who is exchangeable for any 25 of these units, and upon obtaining him, he'll give you the Devil type enhancement badge. Ideally for that exchange, you would want to use Pantheons, but if you don't have enough of those, do be careful about which GFEs you'll be using up as fodder for the next couple of REMs. As an example, Kami can use Sophie and Ark as fodder, but maybe you'll want to save that for the eventual release of Solomon. Mikage is also exchangeable for GFEs, so again, remember my warning about Solomon. Nell is the patch unit for this event, and is therefore also exchangeable, though her fodder only includes units from this REM. Both of these Dark BDP damage dealers can serve as leaders, but they have a few issues. Mikage's leader skill is insanely orb hungry, as they require at least 15 Dark Orbs on the board to fully activate their leader skill. To get all of those orbs on the board, you will have to run orb changers and probably depend on Mikage's special roulette. Mikage also gives you a time buff, so you'll most likely have enough move time to get those 15 Dark Orbs, but you might be out of luck if an enemy overrides your roulette or gives you a time debuff. The 25 billion cap break from the active skill is very significant, but this can be interrupted by other team-wide cap breakers like Maids or Rosetta if you end up using this unit as a sub in those teams. They are a strong unit and could be useful in some teams, but I think at the end of the day, this unit is overshadowed by other cap breakers and orb generators like Rosetta and Maids, who don't really need Mikage's special roulette and time buff. Mikage's equip may be useful in ranking dungeons, as the fixed number of orbs created and the 10 nail orbs could trivialize a specific floor, though I don't think I've seen that being the case so far in JP. If you care about rankings, then maybe this alone is enough reason to exchange for one Mikage, but I would personally skip on this exchange since the use cases for the equip and the base unit are pretty slim. With Nell being the badge unit, you might just want to get her to have access to the Path Cafe badge in your main ideal team. But if you care about the dark PvP teams that this REM brings, then Nell is very essential, as her kit makes her one of the best options to serve as a cap breaker and orb generator. By systeming 2 Nells, you'll get a 12 billion cap break, a shield break, and some dark and heal orbs. Even in a 7x6 board, this unit does not guarantee the 9 dark orbs needed to make a BDP. Your team will have to rely on some other orb generator to cover that gap. As I've mentioned, Butler Lucifer is a very popular choice for this role. Usually 7x6 leader skills are very punishing and were meant to be used to enter a dungeon and then leader swap, but that has been changing as of late. And with Nell, you have a solid leader skill that you can use to tackle endgame content. Her team often looks like this, and one glaring issue with this setup is the lack of a solution to damage absorption shields. Most of her teams rely on her first stage active skill to counter that mechanic, but like I mentioned with Kamimasubi, these long-lasting effects could be voided by some enemies, and with Nell, you could have a way bigger issue since spawns often kill you after their absorption shields are down. While these void buffs are a bit rare at the moment, the popular Maid Nell teams could be rendered ineffective. Nell's equip is great on herself to change her sub-attribute, give you more stats and damage, and it gets you closer to the 5 needed after Noon Tea Awakenings to void poison and thorn damage. This can also be decent on Rosetta if you're going for BDP builds, or any of the other dark BDP units in this REM. Obviously, because Nell is a very important unit for both Ideal and her own teams, you will want to get at least one of her. And if you like to self-pair, you'll obviously want to get 2. But if you're someone with no interest in those teams, I don't know if I would make the exchange. I did mention the equip could work with Rosetta, but this will essentially cost you about 100 stones, and that doesn't really feel worth it to me. Albrecht is a decent wood PvP leader. With 2 of him, you won't have to worry about orb generation and attribute absorption shields. Additionally, with that system, you'll also have a looping HP buff that will further boost the team's bulk. The only bad part about his orb generation is the fact that he doesn't override orbs. So if an enemy gives you a board with a lot of heal orbs, you'll be out of luck. As this is especially dangerous for Albrecht, since his leader skill requires you to match a PvP to activate his damage reduction. This leader is capable of tackling dungeons like GA1, which you can clear now for 85 stones. So if you have nothing better at the moment and manage to get this unit, check the description below for some team inspiration. Since Albrecht is exchangeable for GFEs, remember not to use up any Solomon fodder if you plan to make that exchange in the future. Though this Path Cafe unit wouldn't be on top of my list for exchanging if you have any other meta teams, as Albrecht teams never really stuck around in JP. Sena is another unit that can work as a leader, but her uses are a bit more niche, since she is unable to tackle the latest endgame title dungeons. She can shine in some quest dungeons though, so do keep her in mind if you manage to obtain her. As an example, she will be able to tackle NA's next level EX. Fair warning though, most of her teams heavily rely on fire haiku units, so if you didn't roll them, then you probably shouldn't care much for this mid-priority unit. Again, this REM has 2 really strong teams, Butler Kurotobis and Maid Ideals. Here is a variation of each team, and basically all of the units shown here are the most important ones out of this REM. The Butler Kurotobi team usually runs Isis as a looping shield, but her active skill is also able to tackle Awoken Binds and unmatchable debuffs. Tonik is also a cleric, so it does seem a bit redundant, but since you can also rely on Jean Tonik as a cleric, you can be more liberal with Ice's active skill and pop her every 3 turns to just serve you as a looping shield. Her shield only reduces damage by 30%, which is not that impressive nowadays. But at the very least, with her, you can have an all-path cafe team to fully take advantage of this REMs patch. Isis also has Ls to help recover assists and Heloise to help heal. Since she is REM only and you could end up not getting her, when looking for replacements, you'll want to focus on other utility-focused clerics. Aurora immediately comes to mind since she has a 35% looping shield effect, though this is on a higher cooldown. The upside is obviously that she gives you a lot of bulk, but do keep in mind that Butler Kurotobi's active skill does not generate any fire orbs, and you'll only have light orbs to rely on if you want to recover assists. But back to Isis. Her own equip is great on herself, so make sure to keep at least 2 copies of her, as the equip will solve the bindable issue, boost your healing and bulk, and also provide you 3 skill boosts. Persephone is a great attribute and damage absorption voider that can deal a good amount of damage. With her TPA awakenings, she obviously fits in well in this Butler Kurotobi team, but she can fit in any other team that can afford to match dark TPAs. Rosetta immediately comes to mind, and since Persephone also tackles board shrinks, including Persephone in your Rosetta team will probably feel better for those of you that don't have Muscari. The 2 other slots in that Rosetta team will be used for a cleric and a piercer, with ideally one of them having Ls and also a looping shield. Persephone's equip is great for any dark unit that needs a levitate awakening. If you didn't manage to get Kagayama, this is the next best thing that you could put on a Halloween Kiori or Muscari to maximize the dark bangs and help haste other units in a typical Rosetta team. This is definitely one of the units you want to keep an eye out for if you don't care much for the Ideal and Kuro teams, especially so if you have a Rosetta team without the optimal subs and equips. Jean Tonik is the usual pairing for Butler Kurotobi, as her leader skill lets you ignore move time debuffs and also grants more bonus combos than a double Kurotobi team, making it way easier to reach the NC. This cleric lacks utility, which is why you'd want to include someone like Maid Isis in the typical Butler Kurotobi team. Jean Tonik's role will be mainly to buff your HP, to tank big hits, or to help recover from target attack debuffs, though obviously she can serve as a normal cleric. Mainly relying on Jean Tonik for that role will let you treat Isis as a mere looping shield. Having 2 clerics in a team is obviously a little redundant, but there are some dungeons out there that like to span unmatchable or awoken bind debuffs soon after another. So with these 2 maids in a team, you'll be able to move through a dungeon a little bit faster than normal. If you're not going all out for the Butler Kurotobi team, then I doubt that you'll have much use for Jean Tonik. There really isn't another 3-color meta team out there, and if you're going for a full rainbow team like May Ideals, then you'll have better clerics to choose from like Maid Lavril, since with that leader, you will prefer having units with a light attribute. Jean Tonik's equip is not that impressive since most decent teams usually change all orbs, so the poison and jammer resist are usually not needed. Though if your team desperately needs these 3 full resists on this equip, then this is the best option out there. The active skill is not ideal for the first floor of a dungeon, but this could have some uses since you could overcharge it in some dungeon to help recover from a board shrink, take a big hit, and clear any binds and unmatchable debuffs. Though the use cases for this are very slim, so this equip doesn't really speak to me. Jean Tonik is the orb skin for the REM, but I would not buy the bundle unless you have the subs to make the Butler Kurotobi team work. I would recommend going into the REM first and see if you can get Isis, Persephone, and ideally 1 Kurotobi. Getting a single Kurotobi from the REM will be difficult since he is a BGM unit. His rate is 50% higher than the usual rate, but at 1.5%, you will still have a lot of trouble getting him from the REM. This cap breaker and orb generator can be system with 2 copies. Therefore, you'll need to at least own 1 copy to play Butler Kurotobi. His cap break is restricted to Dragon and Devils, but these are very common monster types, so it shouldn't be hard to meet those requirements even without add monster type equips. This leader is extremely bulky with his 82% damage reduction leader skill, which also gives you a 20 million follow-up attack to make up for the fact that Maid Jean Tonik's leader skill doesn't provide any FUA. And that 20 million number is significant since this is enough to bypass problematic super resolves in in-game content, at least for now. Just like with Jean, Kuro's leader skill requires you to match 3 colors and at least 1 TPA to reduce damage. So if you get awoken bound, you'll die if you don't have your cleric available, since those awakenings will be nullified and you won't be able to activate the leader skills. This is another reason why Isis is often on the team. Even though she's a bit redundant, with Jean as a cleric, the more outs to awoken binds, the better. His equip is great on damage dealers to make them fit into his own teams. Apart from the effective skill boosts and team HPs, the blind resist awakening usually saves you a lot of headaches in rainbow or rainbowish teams. The active skill on the equip is generally good for most teams, since it'll help get your systems up and running. If you won't be matching TPAs and 3 or more attributes, then this equip is honestly not that special. If you have no interest in Butler Kurotobi teams, then I would say that you can skip on this bundle, as the base is basically only used in his teams and the equip is overtuned for his own teams. If you would like to assemble these teams, I wouldn't immediately purchase this unit and would first venture into the REM to get the mid and low rarity best in slot subs. If you manage to get a Kurotobi and not the rest of his subs, you could still make some use of him. You only need 1 Kurotobi to farm the plus point limit breaking dungeon that should be released in NA very soon. That team can clear the dungeon relatively fast with 4 training slots. The trainees still need to fulfill some kind of role to quickly clear the dungeon, but overall, Butler Kuro is one of the faster leaders out there for this tedious new dungeon. That alone doesn't make him worth the $30 in my opinion, especially if you plan to roll in bartenders, since that REM has Violet Fizz, who has a higher pull rate and can also train 4 units in about the same time. Now for the units that make up the Maid ideal team. For the time being, Pattie is one of the better options for the absorption boiling role, but that will soon change with Bright Phenom's upcoming new Evo and Mimosa, who will be a new unit introduced in the bartender's REM. Pattie does bring some utility to the table, but it seems most people in JP quickly dropped her in favor of those 2 other units. So if you're not in a rush or plan to roll a lot in bartenders, it's not the end of the world if you happen to not get this mid-priority unit. Cecilia is a lot harder to replace, as her active skill solves a lot of issues: HP, recovery, move time, and board size debuffs on a really short cooldown. Additionally, she gives you a roulette that can override problematic ones given by enemies. Maid Adelie is maybe a replacement for this unit, since her effects loop, but I would argue that you generally have enough move time from Awakenings alone in an ideal team, and Adelie's HP buff might not come close to tank certain hits. Lavril is usually run as an asymmetrical pairing to ideal, since this unit has a large damage reduction later skill. With this pairing, you'll be able to survive large gravity attacks. Lavril also packs a lot of utility, and she'll be able to help recover assist, heal, and deal with sticky blinds. The only downside is that she's bindable, but you can easily fix that with any equip with an unbindable awakening, as her long cooldown active skill will most likely not overcharge at the start of a dungeon. The first stage of the Evo active skill will grant you a long-lasting shield, though like with the other Pat Cafe units, this buff can be bullied by certain enemies. Usually the bosses in dungeons have 1 or a couple of big unavoidable hits, so if the dungeon has one of those cleansing debuffs, ensure that you can take those hits without Lavril's shield, or have other means of dealing with those hits. Her second stage active skill turns Lavril into a cleric that can also solve attack debuffs. Overall, Maid Lavril will be playing a very important role in Maid ideal teams. Her own equip is great on herself to solve the bindable issue. This equip also adds a lot of bulk, some OEs, and also gives a very useful blind resist awakening, which is usually a must-have in a rainbow team. The active skill is also very useful if you do end up equipping this on herself and then overcharge it, as you will still have the cleric effect and will also get to double your HP, recovery, and move time. This could be very handy if your mate Cecilia is down, or if that unit's 1.5x HP buff isn't enough to tank a hit. The bad part about this unit and Cecilia is that these are REM only, so you will have to spend some stones to get these. If you're not interested in rolling enough to assemble a full ideal team, there is one variation that uses Cecilia and Lavril together with bartending Alexander to also make a really strong rainbow team. So if you only get these 2 last units from the REM and enjoy rainbow teams, you will still have access to a very strong team if you don't end up getting your own Maid ideal. Ideal is the strongest leader from this REM, and some people consider her to be on the same tier as Rosetta. That is, if you don't care for parts farming. as Maid Ideal teams struggle to stack Power Break Awakenings to ensure those drops. This unit is the bulkiest meta leader at the moment, but as I mentioned before, she is very susceptible to gravity attacks. So if you don't expect to encounter a gravity attack higher than 150%, then you could run a double Maid Ideal setup. Her teams need to include 3 of her to guarantee activatable boards and loop the Cap Break and Pierce effects. Her Cap Break is restricted to light attribute units, so ensure that your units have at least 1 light ping to get the boost. If you don't have that attribute on a unit, you will also be missing out on a lot of bulk since her leader skill gives a big raw HP boost to those units. You'll also notice that her leader skill requires you to activate the 5-color match awakening. This again means that you'll need to recover from Awoken Binds ASAP, as without the 20% damage reduction from her leader skill and team HP awakenings, you will most likely be unable to tank any hits. So this team might require some stalling since the usual team only has Lavril as a cleric. Maid Ideal's equip is great to turn a high damage multiplier unit into a really strong rainbow sub, though the active skill doesn't seem that particularly useful. Due to that, you would most likely put this equip on a transforming unit or on one that has a long cooldown Evo active skill such as Mimosa or Maid Pattie. Maid Ideal is exchangeable for 7 Path Cafe units, so you can think of the price of a full Ideal system to be about 210 stones. Though to complete the team, you will still be at the mercy of RNG when it comes to getting Lavril, Cecilia, and maybe Pattie. Another caveat is that you will most likely want to get the patch unit to run the full optimal Maid team. Since Nell requires 10 Path Cafe units as fodder, you'll have to raise that estimate to about 310 magic stones. Also, don't forget the 1 million monster points needed to get Mylk to enhance the badge. At the end of the day, I think 310 magic stones should be your starting point if you want to chase the Maid Ideal team. Worst case scenario, you exchange for 3 ideals with fodder from the 31 pulls and the free rolls and have to find a Maid Lavril helper. It'll be tough to replace Cecilia as a sub, but you have a decent chance of getting at least 1 copy in your rolls for ideal fodder. The chances of getting at least 1 Pattie are a bit lower, but she is easier to replace with Bright Phenom, who will be exchangeable for GFEs in the near future. So again, I think 31 rolls in this REM is a good starting point if you care about the Maid Ideal team. Maybe along the way, you'll also get the pieces for a Butler Kurotobi team. If you do get some of them, you might then be more enticed to purchase the Jin or Kuro bundles to complete the team. Both teams are really strong, but they are arguably not as strong as Rosetta teams, which are much better for performing Power Break if that's something you care about. If you have Rosetta, then you might not care for these Path Cafe leaders and could even skip this REM. That's how I basically feel since I have Rosetta, who is still crushing everything in JP to this day. So at least for the foreseeable future, Rosetta is all I really need. Though another reason why I'm not looking to roll in this REM is the fact that I've been rolling a lot in the last few REMs and need some time to amass more stones. So frankly, this REM looks like an easy skip for me since I don't care that much about these themes. If you feel similarly, then the only thing from this REM that you would hope to get is maybe Persephone. In Rosetta teams, she can deal with absorptions and board shrinks, but if you have the typical Muscati and Halloween Kiori setup, you could honestly forget about this maid as those team variations are still considered to be the optimal ones. The Dark BDP team from this REM didn't have a long shelf life, so I would try not to invest that many resources into the Nell and Mylk teams. Unfortunately, you might still need to exchange for Nell and buy Mylk with MP to perfect your ideal or Kuro teams with the enhanced badge. When it comes to other exchangeable units in this event, I would feel safe skipping these. Tsukuyomi, Kamimasubi, Albrecht, and Mikage all seem very niche, and I wouldn't get any of them without any concrete plans. Albrecht might be the most understandable exchange since he is a somewhat viable leader, but that team quickly fell out of fashion in JP. When it comes to units or equips that scream ranking dungeon, none really stood out. Maybe Mikage's could work due to the fixed number of orbs and Nell orbs, but honestly I would not exchange for them on the very slim chance that this does end up being useful somewhere down the line. Use your own discretion when trading, and remember Solomon. He'll bring us the Devil type enhancement badge in a few months, and just like Bullfeet, he is exchangeable for 25 Pantheons and GFEs. So when making any exchanges between now and Solomon's release, make sure to avoid using enough fodder that you'll need for Solomon, if that's something you plan to do. Now as who to purge, I feel like anyone not on screen is a fair target, though if you have some fire high Q units, I would maybe keep 1 or 2 Maids as she can basically swipe some level 10s and level EXs. I would maybe also add to the list Nephthys, Graphene, and Lucifer, since I feel like they could have some applications. I have actually seen Nephthys on some Rosetta teams, but it hasn't been that many. And when it comes to Graphene and Lucifer, I actually haven't really seen them being put to good use. So if push comes to shove, you could also do without these 3 units. When it comes to future events, nothing that exciting is lined up for our server. JP has been going through a third-party collab drought, so the only events coming to NA are Brides, Bartenders, a Super Catfest with Rosetta and Phyllis, Dragonbound and Dragon Colors, and Pat Island. Brides is an event that you can easily skip, as the highlight unit is Phenom, who doesn't require you to dip into the REM to obtain her, as you can use GFEs as exchange fodder. This event does bring Bride Saphira, who is an MP unit and is on some JP tier lists, though frankly, I've barely seen that many people use her all that much. The Bartender's rerun is a little more exciting than this REM in my opinion. We'll have a new machine that will introduce a bunch of interesting new units like Violet Fest, Bartender Alexander, Mimosa, and Bartender Saline among others. Unfortunately, just like with Path Cafe, a good number of units in the lineup don't have that many applications in my opinion. But that being said, I would rather spend my stones there than in this REM. The Super Catfest with Rosetta and Phyllis in its lineup will cost 7 magic stones per roll, but unfortunately, Rosetta won't be available for exchange like last time. She can only be obtained via rolling or via her $30 bundle. If you only got 1 Rosetta last time and want to complete her system, or missed out on Phyllis, then you might want to set aside stones for that Super Catfest. Dragonbound and Dragon Colors is bloated with a lot of old units that even after their buffs still feel very outdated. The new Raven and Lajua duo unit is seeing some use in some Solomon builds, and if you have any interest in that Dark PvP team, you will most likely have to roll a lot in that 10 Magic Stone REM to be able to exchange for 3 of the duos to create a complete system. Pat Island is about to return to JP, and it's honestly looking like a snooze fest. Gung-Ho introduced a lot of new units, but the seasonal has 2 very bloated machines. The 5 Magic Stone machine has 54 Pat Island units in its lineup. With such a bloated lineup, you'll need a lot of luck to get anything useful out of that machine. There is a new 7 Magic Stone machine that cuts out the 5 and 6 star units, but this lineup still has a lot of old units that are probably not that useful in the current meta. I haven't had the chance to look closely at all of the units, but this seasonal is looking like an easy skip. Do let me know your thoughts though, and also your plans for this REM or for the near future. As I've said, I am basically skipping this event due to having a Rosetta team and being low on magic stones. But even if I weren't broke, I would still probably do a very minimal amount of rolling here and not bother to chase the Nell, Kuro, or Ideal teams. Alright, that does it for this video. I wish you best of luck if you decide to roll. And please remember to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Thank you guys for watching, and a special thanks go out to Ages Number 1 and Awkward Panda, B, Breastfeeding Obama, Dark Silencers, Eddie Ryan, Harry Daven, and Subtop for supporting the channel. I really appreciate it. I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.